Welcome to All Villa, No Filler. Please subscribe to the show. Roberto Olabe is in line to join Aston Villa as Sporting Director. The former Real Sociedad man is due to replace the outgoing Monchi. To find out more, I'm joined by Ruairidh Barlow, who is editor at Football España. Brilliant to have you on, Ruairidh, as always, given that Aston Villa seems like a pretty much a Spanish project. It's always great to have you on. It happens a lot now. But, first of all, there's a lot of fans, I think, in the UK who will not know a lot about the new man, Olabe. So would you be able to tell us about who he is?
Yeah, Olabe has been kind of synonymous with Real Sociedad, essentially. I mean, you might have come across or seen Real Sociedad in Europe in recent years. They've been a fixture in the Europa League and in the Champions League briefly for a season there in the last kind of 5-6 seasons. And that essentially is down to two men. One of them is, three, including their president, Joaquin Aperibay, but two men essentially on the football side of things, which is Imanol Alguacil, their manager, and Roberto Olabe. Olabe was there for 7 years or so. He did have a couple of spells. He's kind of been in and around kind of Spain's kind of second tier, more or less, for much of his kind of sporting director career, to call it that. Had a few management jobs as well, but where he's really kind of valued and where he kind of made his name is at Real Sociedad, and did really well with them for a long time. The last couple of seasons have been a little bit more stagnant, but I think it's fairly understandable. Any cycle comes to an end, and after kind of 5-6 years, usually there's very few people in football that end up successful after that length of time.
And what do people generally think of him in Spain?
Yeah, he's got a very good reputation, it has to be said. I mean, Olabe and Real Sociedad for about 4 or 5 years were the model club in Spain. I mean, they brought through a lot of academy talents as well to go with, kind of complemented with this kind of brand of cast off is the wrong word, but kind of genius, talented wonder kids that never quite kind of hit the ground running. Alexander Isak being one, Martin Odegaard being another one, and Mikel Merino as well, another one that's now at Arsenal too. But those are all kind of players that moved to big clubs very young as teenagers, didn't quite work out. Real Sociedad brought them in and kind of gave them an environment in which to develop and profited well off them. With that, you kind of had some more veteran signings, the likes of Nacho Monreal, David Silva kind of came in and just kind of helped nurture these kind of younger talents through. And those younger talents as well have been very good. I mean, Real Sociedad have been one of the key suppliers of the Spain national team in the last few years. And yeah, Olabe has been a huge part of that.
Yeah, I went to see Barcelona play Real Sociedad about 5-6 years ago at the Nou Camp, and I was blown away by just the standard of the Real Sociedad team, really. I'd sort of let that go past me a bit. And, so Sociedad kind of in recent years, when I grew up watching La Liga, it tended to be Valencia, and teams like Sevilla were the teams who were ahead. But now I feel like Sociedad in the last kind of 10 years have sort of taken over where they used to be. How successful was Olabe at Sociedad? I know you've touched on it, but also like how kind of transformative was he?
Yeah, it was huge. I mean, Real Sociedad, they had kind of a couple of good seasons towards kind of 2013-14, just before David Moyes came, incidentally. Not saying the two are related, but yes, they had a couple of really good seasons around then. But in terms of kind of stability, La Real were never kind of the most stable in the kind of 21st century. And I kind of spoke to Olabe a few years ago now. It was back in 2021, 22. And the thing that he kind of emphasized most was consistency. And he's kind of a very stern, there's a slightly intimidating edge to him. You get the impression that he's not the sort of guy that suffers fools. And Olabe kind of implemented a kind of much more stable idea of what he wanted at Real Sociedad, very focused on the academy. And it'll be interesting to see how that kind of works at Villa, because Villa obviously have a good academy, a successful academy, but with Real Sociedad, they kind of already had an established kind of pathway, and it's much more difficult to get players into the Premier League who are younger, just based on what I see from the outside at the very least. So it'll be interesting to see how he kind of blends that. And also, as with kind of Monchi, kind of working with a bigger budget, essentially. I mean, with Real Sociedad, you're always kind of within your limitations. And if there's one kind of criticism of Olabe over the last few years, it was the fact that Real Sociedad never managed to replace Isak. I mean, they've essentially had a bit of a glass ceiling placed on them by their lack of a kind of goal scorer, lack of a striker. Since Isak left, they've had Alexander Sørloth, Andre Silva, Ori Oskarsson is the latest kind of attempt to fill that void. Umar Sadiq, who's played for Nigeria as well, another player they spent big on. And they've essentially spent much of their budget over the last kind of 3 years since Isak left for Newcastle on trying to replace Isak.
Right, yeah, not an easy player to replace there, is he? As Newcastle themselves might be about to find out. So you've mentioned a couple of his signings, Odegaard, Isak as well. But who else? Who were some of his sort of star signings while he was at Sociedad?
Yeah, Odegaard and Merino for me is the one that stands out as kind of real value. I mean, he came in after a spell at Dortmund where he didn't do so well. And what you see now, Merino, is not the kind of Merino that arrived at Real Sociedad. He was kind of quite young. He'd kind of played in the Premier League, obviously, with Newcastle as well. Beefed up a little bit, but he became kind of a todocampista, as you'd say in Spain, kind of an everywhere midfielder where he can do kind of anything. He can sit deep and play kind of in front of the back four. He can bring the ball out. He's good in the air. So he's the kind of sporting director that will identify these kind of raw talents and give them the environment to flourish. Unai Emery has obviously demonstrated that he's able to do that as well. And I think where you'll get kind of value from Olabe is Villa will be able to sign players from kind of that kind of second tier. And again, in theory, what Monchi was doing as well, that kind of second tier of sides across Europe and kind of the cast-offs from these kind of Premier League giants in terms of United, Chelsea, Liverpool, Liverpool less so, but who tend to use their resources poorly and kind of bring in those players and give them the platform to perform.
Right, and so you've also mentioned his overall approach. You mentioned a focus on youth. Was his focus kind of sort of unifying the entire club to have a certain style of play and a certain system? Is that kind of what we should expect at Aston Villa as well?
Yeah, I mean, Real Sociedad have always been quite kind of open-minded approach in terms of kind of style. I mean, it's not, as you say, like Barcelona, where everyone is playing kind of the exact same style. It's not quite Real Madrid, where for much of kind of Real Madrid's recent history, the managers themselves are kind of given freedom to interpret. Zubieta, you get kind of, Zubieta is the name of the academy at La Real, you get kind of a kind of general approach of we want our players to be capable of playing these different styles of football within kind of a Basque identity of kind of physical, fast, direct football, but also being able to kind of work under pressure. You see that in kind of midfielders with like the likes of Beñat Torrientes, who's just coming through. Zubimendi is obviously the prime example, the golden boy of Basque football at the moment. But yeah, I think with Roberto Olabe, that will be kind of the big questions because I mean, Real Sociedad, for context, there's been times in recent years where they've been the side with kind of the second or third most academy products in their squad, kind of 15, 16 of their squad made up of players from the youth teams. So yeah, how Olabe replaces that, whether he can kind of implement something similar at Villa. Obviously, Unai Emery, who's not a manager that certainly in Spain was famed for bringing through players as well. That will be kind of one of the mind melds that we'll have to kind of watch out for. There is kind of an advantage in the sense that Unai Emery and Olabe are from very similar areas of the country. They will know each other very, very well. We've worked together, I think, at Almeria before as well. So, yeah, I think Olabe and Emery will be very familiar with each other. But how Olabe kind of adapts to a new kind of structure, a new kind of environment will be kind of the making or breaking of this job.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Just the sheer number of Basque coaches out there right now. And, Olabe himself, has he had quite an influence upon those coaches?
Yeah, I mean, Olabe is quite, as I say, just kind of speaking about his character, the main kind of thing that he kind of preaches is patience and consistency. There's a very good quote where he says, if you're kind of a stonemason, if you're a blacksmith, an architect, I don't expect to know what kind of footballer you are at 20, 18 even. I'm going to give you time to develop, essentially. So I guess you'll see some of that at Villa is giving these players a chance to develop, maybe not kind of being so hot button with kind of signing and selling players. Again, that's very difficult, of course, in the Premier League where there's kind of a little bit more pressure for results that comes with the increased spending. But yeah, for Olabe, I think his general kind of job, or what he sees his job as, is to be able to give players tools to kind of tackle their situations, to be able to improve, and to kind of give them the time to do so.
Yeah, and now obviously he's going to have to work very close with Unai Emery, and it sounds kind of like the noises are that Unai Emery sort of has a final say over who comes in and out of the club, which is quite unusual, I guess, in modern day football that coaches have that level of influence. But he's Olabe spent a long time at Sociedad with Imanol Alguacil. Apologies
Well
for
said.
the pronunciation. Yeah. Did he show during that time working with Alguacil for such a long time that he can, build a strong relationship with a manager?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the two of them were joined at the hip for a long time towards the end of kind of last season. So just coming into the end of their kind of spell together. There were reports of fallings out, but again, as I say, after kind of 5-6 years in football, very few people continue working together, to be perfectly honest. But I think the two of them, as I say, they had a very good, strong working relationship. And I think Alguacil, Olabe will be able to work with a manager that kind of wants kind of a final say on transfers, and I think he will see his job as much more kind of global than that. And I guess that's maybe part of the difference that you'll get with Olabe and Monchi. Monchi is a man that identified good players with kind of capabilities and talents that he could bring in and kind of improve, make better, and kind of sell them on. Whereas Olabe is kind of more of a kind of global kind of team kind of building kind of idea, as opposed to just here's a talent, let's kind of make it work for us, make it kind of fit. Whereas I think Olabe is a bit more kind of, right, okay, we've got these resources, what do we lack, what do we need? Let's not kind of spend money kind of frivolously, even if we think the player is necessarily worth it. But again, of course, with the budget changes, with the difference in approach, you might see a little bit kind of more loose purse strings than he did at La Real.
Okay, and just a couple more questions. He was at Sociedad for 7 to 8 years. What was the general feeling when he left the club this summer?
I think there's a kind of a feeling, again, with Alguacil as well, that the time was kind of right, that they'd come to the end of their kind of spell or journey together, that they'd been very successful. I think there's obviously some kind of nostalgic sadness and melancholy that they're departing, but an acknowledgement that it was time to kind of move on. I mean, as I say, La Real kind of stagnated. Last season was the first time in 6 years since Imanol Alguacil's first had a full season in charge that they hadn't qualified for Europe. So yeah, I think there was a feeling that it was time to move on. But having said that, they've also had a bit of a rocky summer. This year, he was replaced by his head scout, Eric Bretos, and Sergio Francisco. Let's not forget that Alguacil was the B team manager when Olabe appointed him. Sergio Francisco is the B team manager at La Real, who's replaced Alguacil as well. So they've both kind of been taken over by their, in theory, kind of apprentices or by the kind of next people up. And it's not necessarily going too well so far, it has to be said.
Yeah, I saw that. So just as a sort of final question, I guess, like overall, how should Villa fans feel about Olabe coming into the club, do you reckon?
I mean, he's very highly rated. For example, he was in the frame seemingly for the Arsenal job. Andrea Berta eventually got that, replacing Edu, but I think most people in Spain would have said that Olabe is kind of a more reliable or more proven choice than Andrea Berta. Berta always kind of had this mixed record where you were never quite sure whose choices were whose, and this Joao Felix issue and so on. Whereas Real Sociedad, as I say, for a long time, they were kind of the model of recruitment, youth academy, and being kind of smart about their spending. So yeah, I guess especially if Villa, you'll know more about the profit and loss rules and what situation Villa are in, but especially if they are working within kind of more restrictions, then I think Olabe is kind of maybe a smart choice to go and do so.
Okay, brilliant. And so, Rory, absolutely brilliant to chat to you. I always love chatting football with you. I think I could talk to you for about 10 years straight about everything I ever thought about Spanish football. But for those who don't know, where can we find you and your work online?
Yeah, head to footballespaña.net in order to find kind of our work. And on social media, you can find me at Ruairidh Barlow. Football España is the same on social media too. But yeah, on Twitter, if you go to my profile, I've pinned that interview with Roberto Olabe, so you can go and read a bit about him and his kind of philosophy, his ideas, what he kind of thinks. And that was at the peak of their powers when they were challenging for the Champions League and did eventually get into it.
Brilliant. I could strongly recommend reading all that. Love reading all your stuff. And Football España is a great site for anyone who wants to learn more about Spanish football. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Rory, and wish you all the best. And I'm sure I'll see you soon because Aston Villa seemingly are always doing things in Spain.
No doubt. No doubt.